Geeks and geekettes, fanboys and fangirls, ladies and gentlemen, senors and senoritas, meine Damen und Herren, comic book fans from all over the world. I welcome you to another episode of Ask Chuck Dixon, where you get to ask me questions about what I do for a living. And what I do for a living is I write comic books. You've got other things to do. Keep your eyes on the road and listen up. I got one more thing. I usually do one more thing at the end, but I wanted to address this one up first. Not that a lot of you complained or called me out on this, but a couple of videos ago, I made some remarks about Frank Miller, and they really weren't about Frank Miller. They were about fans making claims for Frank Miller that I felt were untrue. In a Facebook thread, a fan put forth that thought balloons were no longer de rigueur in comics because Frank Miller did away with them using first person narration. And I kind of called foul on that. He didn't create first person narration in the captions. This had been done many, many times before in comics, before Dark Knight Rises. So, but I want to make clear that this criticism was of the person making that claim on Mr. Miller's behalf, not a criticism of Mr. Miller himself. I'm sure Mr. Miller would agree with me that he's had many, many influences in his life. Will Eisner, Harvey Kurtzman, Joe Kubert, people like that. And I always one thing I do credit Frank Miller with is being a major proponent in moving comics away from the kind of talking head storytelling style of the 70s and early 80s and moving us more toward cinematic storytelling style, which was put forward by people like these three men. You know, a more pure comics, visually driven storytelling style. So nobody's going to take that away from Frank Miller. I've pointed out over and over again, in addition to Will Eisner, Joe Kubert was obviously a major influence on Miller's work. If you compare, particularly in the Daredevil period, his storytelling style to Kubert, there's not a lot of daylight between the two. He's not copying Kubert in any way, but he is very much influenced by Joe Kubert's more cinematic storytelling style. And I'm sure that Frank Miller would agree with me that all of us, generations who followed these great and influential comic book creators, all of us work in the shadow of those men. You know, we're not reinventing comics. We are playing with a lot of the tools that they gifted us with. And, you know, yes, I think a lot of artists make advancements in the medium, innovations in the medium, but the basics were kind of laid down for us by people like Kurtzman, Eisner, you know, Kubert, Wally Wood, Carl Barks, Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko, you know, and I think that Frank Miller would agree with me on that. So once again, I was not criticizing Frank Miller. He did not make those claims for himself, nor do I think he ever would. Lewis Porter Jr. In today's comic book industry, are floppy monthly single issues even viable, or is the correct approach similar to what Rippaverse has done with trade paperback sized books released every quarter, bi-yearly, or yearly? What is more important, regular monthly smaller chapter story releases or large full story releases? Well, I mean, let's face it, the way comics are marketed have changed. Comic books were frequently seen, always seen on the newsstand or spin racks at grocery stores and drugstores, places like that. And this is how they reached their readers. And they were periodicals, they were magazines, they came out monthly or bi-monthly, and they were read by a reading audience, you know, anxious to read the next installment, you know, looking forward to the next comic. Fresh material every month. That was the way they were doing it. Well, that's completely changed now with the direct sales market, with the comic shop, with the abandonment of the newsstand. They are not reaching out to new readers. They're not reaching out to kids. As I've said over and over again, we lost generations of children because of not making an active marketing effort to put comics in front of kids. And when I say us, I mean mainstream. I mean DC, Marvel, and the rest. Concentrate on direct market, not on bringing in new readers. But that's not to say comics went away or comics were dead, because kids still wanted to read comics and they still liked comics when they saw them. And so you move into a different format and a different price point. Manga, it's well known, is eating the lunch of the American comic book market, with the majority of sales in manga. Manga is a better value, I don't know what they cost, $9 to $12 for an afternoon's read. There's a lot of reading in a manga. And you compare that to the value of spending the same money on some comic books. What are you going to get? 3 comic books, maybe 2 comic books for that price, and you're going to be done reading them in 15 to 20 minutes. So there's the value, and I think the entertainment value as well is generally superior in manga than the current offerings of mainstream American comic book readers. Now, the other market share in comics, which dwarfs DC and Marvel at like 4 and 5% of the market. The other one is the graphic novel book trade, which kids are introduced to in school. Scholastic does a lot of graphic novels. If you go to Sam's Club, Walmart, Target, you're going to find graphic novels aimed at kids, and they vary in quality and everything else. But most importantly, they're far more popular than Marvel or DC. Something like Dogman. I just read that Dogman by Dave Pilkey. There's been like a dozen volumes, and they sell in the tens of millions. Just hugely successful. The kind of numbers that DC and Marvel, quite frankly, have not seen in a long, long time, 40 years maybe, so, or more. And so those are the comics that kids are seeing. That's what they're graduating toward. And I got to imagine that they, are graduating from Dogman and some of these other graphic novel series, graduating from them to manga, not to American comics. Because where are they seeing American comics? The only American comics I see readily available to the casual reading public are Archie's. I go to my local grocery store, and they have Archie collections on the impulse rack at the cash register, and they have them in the magazine section, those little digest sizes, chunky digest size books, which if you look at the price point of them, you're seeing value. You buy an Archie book, if you're a kid, that's a long car ride worth of reading. That's an afternoon worth of reading for the price of 2 regular comic books, which is like 40 pages. Buy an Archie, a chunky Archie digest, you're getting 150 plus pages of material. And thereby hangs the tale. Comics always have to listen to who their audience is. Now, when you move to crowdfunding, like Rippaverse, like Compass Comics, like Billy Tucci's company or Brian Pulido or whatever, and you're aiming it at devoted fans, you're aiming it at a much higher price point than normal comics. You're offering tchotchkes, you're offering some degree of collectability, exclusivity, and all the rest of it. And also the idea that you are directly supporting this material that you like. But they're a little more costly to buy. And floppies are not going to go in that market. Nobody's going to want to buy a floppy in that market, so you've got to give more. So Rippaverse gives you value by offering, Rippaverse and the others, by offering longer form graphic novels. Most Rippaverses are 100 plus pages. You're getting the equivalent of 4 issues of a comic book, but all told in one, big story. And it's more tentpole, more event publishing. I look toward Graham Nolan's company, Compass Comics. Graham is all about event publishing. Chinoo was an event. Alien Alamo is an event. His Monster Island series, each installment of that is an event. And if you're a fan of his work, and why wouldn't you be, you don't want to miss them. And when you get them, I'm sure you're super happy because Graham has done all kinds of, tchotchkes and stretch goals and everything else. So you're going to get this nice little Gemini box with a lot of cool stuff in it. And you bought a collectible because of low print runs. But as we see at Rippaverse, we're moving beyond collectible because Rippaverse is doing real numbers. I mean, Horseman sold, and it still continues to sell. But at this point, it's sold between 14 and 15,000 copies, which for a floppy, that's not good. For a trade paperback, that's awesome. Those are good numbers. Those are DC Marvel numbers for a totally independently produced comic book product. So I think that's DC and Marvel really need to take a look at this and think more about event publishing, putting out something special. We all remember, when, Dark Knight Rises or The Nail or, things like that came out from DC. Standalone graphic novels and collections. We look forward to those things. Those were events. The monthly comic is not an event anymore because it's no longer on the newsstand. Sales are absolutely miserable. They're way below break-even point. Marvel and DC are hemorrhaging money on that end. They're making up for it in licensing. But, you and I, we're devoted comic book fans. We would like to see this medium survive. And it is surviving. It's just not it's not the kind of comics we want, selfish fanboys and fangirls that we are. But anyway, the crowdfunding kings, they're showing the way forward. And eventually, these movers and shakers within the industry, which are never seen on the pie charts of market share, I'd really be curious, what part of the market does crowdfunding have? And I'm sure it's inching up or maybe surpassed either DC or Marvel as far as market share. Eventually, these crowdfunders will move into where and are already moving into the retail space. They are moving past funding from the fans to actually reaching casual reading public, more exposure to a public that already wants to buy comics in this form. They already want to spend X amount of dollars for X amount of pages and feel like they got a value. So yeah, comics, floppy comics, sad as it is, I love comic books. I love comic book as a magazine, love the periodicals. I wrote thousands of them. It's over. It's over. And DC and Marvel killed it by abandoning the newsstand. Muttman, speaking of Dogman, can you talk about your experience writing Bruce Wayne, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. for the Amalgam crossover? How did all the character decisions get made between the two companies? The end results seem well balanced. Yeah, I got assigned this one. They told me the gag. We're going to mix these characters up. Titles were determined by editors at DC and Marvel. We're going to do, this, that, Hulk thing, whatever they did. We're going to mix up these characters. And then they were assigned to creative teams. And Carrie Nord and I were assigned to do Bruce Wayne, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. And I dug the idea. I was already writing Batman. I was a huge fan of Nick Fury and S.H.I.E.L.D., so I was conversant with the stuff. And largely Marvel and DC relied upon that with the creators. They chose creators who were experienced in either one or both of the characters they were writing. And largely left it up to us. Now, I don't know if other writers had a problem with this. The only thing we were told is when you mix the two universes, try to be as try to create a ratio of 50-50. So you're mixing up your references to Marvel and DC characters at an even rate. So both companies get the same exposure. You're not favoring DC over Marvel or Marvel over DC. And I never heard back. I mean, I made the effort to do that. I had a lot of fun doing that. Characters like Moonwing. So, mixing up villains, mixing up heroes, mixing up situations. So I had a lot of fun doing that, and apparently I did okay because I never heard back for rewrites. And I don't know if the other creative teams did either, but I'm assuming if you look at the roster of creators on the Amalgam books, I don't think any of those folks had any trouble with this assignment. Probably had as much fun as I did. If you've never read the Amalgam books, it was unusual. They're unusual to read, and kind of unusual and kind of fun as a writer because they didn't tell complete stories. They were never meant to tell complete stories. They're complete pastiche. You began your story with a little bit of recap to a previous issue that never existed, and then you left off on a cliffhanger that would never be resolved. Your whatever issue you were doing was in the middle of a run of an already existing book, already existing imaginary series in some parallel universe where DC and Marvel were one company. So it was fun. It was a lot of fun. I'd like to see them do that again with, talented folks like they did it before. Ace Mowick, thoughts on black and white comics that later get colorized and re-released. I find this irritating and the weak excuse I've heard that publishers are essentially doing the same thing in principle by releasing colored comics in black and white, but the phone book size collections has no merit, considering someone can still admire the art and the ink work of the black and white editions, not to mention a more affordable price for the amount of stories you get. And I guess that's what it's about. It's about price point. They feel they can charge more for the color, even though, dirty little secret, printing in color is no longer as prohibitive as it used to be. There's not a whole lot of difference these days, especially with foreign printers. There's not a whole lot of difference between publishing in black and white and color. It used to be really prohibitive, but you can charge a lot more for color for whatever reason. I don't think that readers give a damn one way or the other. And if you're watching this, you can see a good reason not to color comics. John Buscema, Savage Sword of Conan, inked by Alfredo Alcala. Alcala doing like this Gustave Doré level inking that when you color it, totally loses everything that makes this work fantastic and effective. Much like colorizing movies, where you're just throwing a palette of color over images that were never meant to be in color, that were produced to be in black and white. The cinematographer shot these movies, he lit these movies, these movies were composed to be in black and white, never to be in color. You, just like the comics and the movies, you add color to it and you de-emphasize the effect the artist was going for. Look at this image with the sort of faded, almost penciled image of Conan, evolving into a fully inked figure. Throw color on that and it's lost. The effect is lost. And often coloring something, just colorizing something, you lose the emphasis that the creator originally went for. You lose important elements within the images that help tell the story, and just sort of come up with a hodgepodge of nothing. And to say that color, the readers want color, well, manga says different. Most manga is entirely in black and white. And I know from independent publishing and everything else, we've determined that the readers really don't care if it's in color or black and white. If it's a good story and they like it. I have a series called Midnight's War. It's a police procedural spin-off from the vampire series that Vox Day and I created. And we're doing this new edition in black and white. And we told the artist, we're going to print it in black and white. And he added washes and tones and just beautiful stuff. I wouldn't want to ever see it in color now. And it just seemed to fit, and readers actually like it better. So why colorize? And I think it's a purely like myopic, stupid business decision. If we put this in color, we can charge more. And I like, conversely, I like seeing sometimes I like seeing the color work reproduced in black and white. So I can see like line art, Murphy Anderson's line art on Hawkman, which I could never really see that clearly because of the color. I used to buy all of the showcases and a lot of the Marvel Essentials simply to see the artwork in black and white, just to look at it, curiosity. So there you go. Adam Stackle. Since you brought up War Machine and asked Chuck Dixon number 224, I was curious what you thought of Frank Castle wearing the armor in Punisher 28 or 218 to 228. Do you think Frank would take the opportunity to work on a global scale if he had access to that kind of firepower? I think Frank only sees what's in front of him. I don't think he has any, other than pursuing criminals across the globe. I don't think he's not thinking about a global reach. He's just thinking about the most effective way to knock off as many hoods as possible. Now, as far as armored up, I did not see the issues you're talking about, but I armored up, Gary Klopis and I armored up our Punisher early on. In Punisher War Journal, we had an arc in which Punisher was going into a particularly hot situation, and Micro created an armor exoskeleton suit for him. It was kind of a dollar store Iron Man thing. And the point of the story, to our mind, is Punisher should never be armored because it can fail. You have a system failure, and in this story, the suit does malfunction and puts Frank into more danger than he would have been in had he just left it home. Because Frank is not a multi-billionaire like Tony Stark who can do all the R&D. He basically had Micro working on a Temu budget to create him an armored suit, and it didn't really work out. And that was the point of the story. But then apparently years later, they decided that they would give Punisher armor, and looking at the issue numbers, he had armor for 10 issues. So I assume he achieved some degree of success with this new armor. I'm kind of curious now, was it a gift from Tony Stark? Was it leftovers from Stark Industry? Where did this armor come from? How did he build it? So anyway, yeah, interesting question. But, Gary and I were there first. So, Gentle Savage. Do you have any advice on how to write romantic relationships in a comic or any other story without making them feel corny or overdramatic? Also, in comparison to other aspects of writing a story, are romance subplots something you enjoy writing or find boring to do? Also, do you think of the hero's journey as a storytelling template? Do you think it's nonsense or useless at all? I've gone on long rants about the hero's journey and the hero with 1,000 faces and all that other Joseph Campbell crap. No, I don't like templates in storytelling. I don't believe that there's only certain types of stories that we can enjoy, that our brains are kind of set to accept certain kind of stories and not accept others. Unfortunately, Hollywood has, and comic book writers have adopted these things, which is why we have so many boring, predictable stories now. If you want to write a story with no surprises and totally predictable, then yes, follow the Joseph Campbell thing. The rest of you, ignore the Joseph Campbell thing and just write the story that you want to write, and let the chips fall where they may. Who knows? You may come up with a totally brand new, fresh plot line. Certainly, you're going to come up with different takes on different genres than if you just followed this sort of tired formula that Campbell, who's never written fiction in his life, came up with. As far as romance goes, as I've often said, the most important thing when you're writing two characters falling in love is that you make the reader or viewer fall in love with them first. We have to meet them, get to know them, see the admirable qualities, the attractive qualities in both. And then when they get together, we're all for them being in love because we love both of them. And we're like, these people belong together. These are two good people, or whatever. And the bond between them can be, or the factors that draw them together or make the romance seem natural can range everything, from likability and charm to a good heart to even vulnerability or need. One character is lonely and the other character reaches out to them. Well, at this point of their meeting, if we've done our work correctly, we already love both characters. So when the one character reaches out in need, we want the other character to respond. Now, what would make it boring, and I never find writing romantic stuff boring if it feels natural, is if they just fall in love and that's it, and there's no further complications, there's no element of danger or mystery or outside threat drawing them apart. The best, the old Hollywood formula of the love rack, where you have two characters meet and they are drawn together and drawn apart, sometimes by the same elements. And there's complications in their relationship. I mean, as tried and true as Romeo and Juliet, where there are differences between the two families make them have to hide their romance in secret, and their love life is always in jeopardy. Their relationship is always in doubt. There's tension. Or something like one that I often point to, The Postman Always Rings Twice, where the bond between the two characters is lust followed by murder. And the murder is what brings them together. They're accomplices in killing someone, and it's what brings them together, but it's also what draws them apart, because once pressure is applied on them, the instinct of self-preservation kick in, and their romantic story is done because the need they feel to betray one another in order to save themselves. So there's a million different ways to write the love rack, which makes writing a believable romantic situation always interesting. Now, in the case of Peter Parker and Mary Jane, or when I was writing Dick Grayson and Barbara Gordon, these are long established characters that the readers already love. We love everything about them. We really like them. And when they join in a romantic relationship, we feel, okay, this is natural, this is good, we want to see this continue. And of course, writers are cruel to their readers. It's okay, we know that. We know you want them to be together. And so we're going to introduce complications and difficulties and obstacles in their path to true happiness. And in many cases, they're never going to reach true happiness. Going to keep that pot boiling, where their relationship is constantly being threatened by outside elements or human foible or whatever. So yeah, I like writing. I don't write them often, but when they feel natural and they feel good to me, and they feel like the characters earned it, I will write them. And too many times I see in current writing, particularly in shows on streaming shows, I don't feel the characters earned the romance that they're in. They fall in love to advance the story, or they fall in love because it's a convenient trope, or it's an expected trope. But did I believe it that I like these characters? In old movies, which, like old romantic comedies, 30s and 40s, which if you want to write romance, I urge you to watch 30s and 40s romantic comedies. Billy Wilder, Frank Capra, Preston Sturges, and these guys will show you the way. The amazingly brief amount of time in an old movie that they spend setting up the premise of the boy-girl relationship is astounding. I got in the habit of timing. If I'm watching an old movie, my wife and I watch a lot of these. I'm watching an old movie, I'll take note of the time in which the meet cute happens and the story begins. The complications of the story begin, and it's incredible. Within 7 minutes, 5 minutes. I think in a movie called Easy Living with Jean Arthur and Ray Milland, it's like 3 minutes. And we know everything we need to know about the two lead characters, and we like them. And when they get romantically involved, we enjoy it. It's fun, and it feels natural, not strained. And the best kind of romance story is when we fall in love with them before they fall in love with each other. So there you go. That's that's all I have to say on the subject of romance and love. Brandon Woodall. Without giving too much away, I'm writing a cosmic mythology mixed story where near the end, The main villain is undone by the very thing he desired because of a twist. I like a lot of what I planned for it, but what concerns me is the possibility of it rendering the hero's actions unnecessary, that if they had just let the villain go after what he wanted, all of their hardships could have been avoided. Do you have any suggestions for what I can do about that? Well, it sounds to me like the ending of your story is the story. That this revelation or twist or turn at the end that brings the villain to ruin. That is your story. You're writing and setting everything up toward that ending. The fact that at the end of the story the hero is redundant or didn't have a place, I wouldn't be so concerned about that, because you're instilling in the reader the belief that the hero is important to the story. And in the end, we find out his actions didn't matter. It's kind of a second twist of the tale. And written properly, most readers won't even realize that's the case. But like I said earlier, don't worry about established models for storytelling. If you got the story and you got what you feel is a really strong ending, go for it, because people are only going to remember that ending. That's going to be, the thing they take away. Is if the ending is surprising enough and innovative enough and cathartic enough, that's what they're going to remember. They're not going to remember the process leading up to it. And there's been lots of stories written in the past where characters, either the lead character wasn't as important to the story in the end as he appeared to be throughout, or even stories where the lead character actually made things worse by their involvement. I remember my family and I went to the drive-in back in the 60s, and one of the movies at the drive-in was called Shenandoah, a movie with Jimmy Stewart. It was a Civil War era story in which Stewart's son gets drafted or pressed into joining the Confederate Army, or taken prisoner. I can't remember what. But anyway, their son disappears from the farm and ends up, in the middle of the hell of the American Civil War. And rather than sit home and wait for his son to return, Jimmy Stewart packs up the family into a wagon and goes looking for the son. And by doing this, he brings calamity down upon his family. He's basically taking his family into a war zone, and they pay the price for this. There's huge consequences and suffering and loss because of this. And in the end, he didn't change anything at all that happened. His son would have faced the same fate whether his father had gone out looking for him or not, except his son would have come home to his entire family, not finding some of them were, dead or mutilated or lost. So Jimmy Stewart's actions ran contrary to the best interests of the rest of the characters who relied on him. And I remember how annoyed my parents were when I pointed this out to them after the movie was done. It's like I was a kid. I wasn't supposed to notice stuff like that. They didn't notice it. And I was like, man, he should have stayed home. So yeah, but the thing is, write your story. If your story is all about that ending. So go to it, my friend. Wesley Smith, question. The origin of the character Shotgun appeared in your run on Punisher Warzone with JR. Great stuff. First appearance, as far as I know. He was teased in Stan's Soapbox or something back in the day to have a graphic novel miniseries of his own. Don't think that ever happened, but I think you were on the listed creative team. He's popped up a few times in the last 30 years, always in books drawn by Johnny Romita Jr. What's the story in the creation of that character? He's 90s as hell in a good way. I like that dude. Well, Johnny brought Shotgun to us pretty much full blown, full scale. He'd already figured it out. I remember our first meeting. We had a lot of meetings in that first arc on Punisher Warzone because Don Daly really wanted the book to succeed. And Johnny wanted some input on the creative end of it. And I welcomed that, of course. We had any number of people at lunches discussing what to do in the first 6 issues, or first 6-issue arc. And Johnny was there for a couple of the meetings. I remember when we sat down, we had never worked together before. Um, his two main interest points were first that Frank Castle, we lean into Frank Castle being Italian, being a Brooklyn guy and an Italian guy. And I'm like, hey, I'm cool with that. I like that. I like that idea a lot. I can do a lot with that. And I said, let's go all the way and have him infiltrate the mafia. Takes on a new persona, Johnny Tower, and becomes, a undercover mafia hood to take down the Carbone family from the inside. Johnny liked that idea a whole lot. Everybody liked that idea a whole lot. And then Johnny said, well, I have this character. His name is Junior Walker. His name is Shotgun. And I want to introduce him. And I'm like, and he had some drawings. I'm like, cool, I like this. He's like a 1970s black exploitation character, kind of Truck Turner kind of guy. Or even closer, the character that Rosie Greer played in a recurring role in Kojak as a shotgun wielding bounty hunter. And I said, yeah, I dig that a lot. I was like, I can work this guy into the story, make him an integral part of the story. I got no problem at all. I remember Johnny saying, his name is Junior Walker. Remember Junior Walker and the All Stars? I'm like, yeah, I remember them. He goes, they had that song Shotgun. I'm like, yep, I remember that. That's cool. That is a cool idea. Let's do that. Now, I remember the Stan Soapbox thing announcing that, or it was in Marvel Age or something like that, where Johnny was saying that he wanted to continue and do a miniseries or graphic novel. I don't think my name was mentioned in connection with that. I think Johnny planned on working with Howard Mackey. Howard and Johnny worked together quite a bit. They collaborated quite a bit there in the 90s at Marvel. And I think he was to be involved with it, not me. But I can claim co-creator credit because I, did a lot to bring the character to life beyond Johnny's terrific first images of him. So, but yeah, I don't think I was ever considered part of that. But yeah, that was largely Shotgun is all Johnny Romita Jr. And it was cool. It was a cool working relationship that we had. Ryan Howard, I recently started reading your Detective Comics run from the beginning as a prelude to rereading Nightfall. I noticed in your first 3 arcs you opted to pit Batman and Robin against either reimagined obscure villains, Cluemaster, Electrocutioner, or entirely new villains, General, Cypher, Bane. Was it your idea to rely more on your creations leading into Nightfall, or were you specifically assigned to expand the Rogues Gallery a bit more leading up to Nightfall? Side note, I didn't realize how early on in your Detective run Spoiler appeared. I always associated her more with the early 2000s Bat family, and just assumed she debuted somewhere around No Man's Land. I was not alive for the first 3 years of your Detective run, though, so perhaps my ignorance can be forgiven. Yes, your prenatal knowledge of comics history, yes, you are forgiven. You didn't know about comics before you were born, which, but thank you for looking into the past, because there's so many great comics. Um, Almost 100 years of great comics. Anyway, yeah, Spoiler was created early on in my Detective run. She's created as a plot device for a single arc. I never really planned on ever using her again, but readers began to write in saying, when will the Spoiler return? And so I thought, okay, let me think more on this character, expand her a little bit more. And she eventually became my favorite of all the DC comic book characters I created. She was my favorite, the one I had the most affinity for. And of course, close second is Bane. But Bane was an assignment when I bitched and moaned about how hard it was going to be to create this unnamed villain that was going to be at the center of Nightfall. And I kept saying, look, Nightfall's not going to work if the readers don't respond to this guy, if they don't love to hate him, if he's lame. This whole Nightfall thing's going to fall apart. And so Denny got tired of me, being a Cassandra on this, and told me to, go home and create it. And Graham Nolan and I, whipped this guy up. with a lot of thought, and a lot of phone calls, a lot of faxes back and forth. It's back when there were faxes. So Bane was pretty much an assignment, but I did go on to create a lot of new characters, ancillary characters, villains, and gadgets while I was on Batman and the Batman related books. And mostly this is because we were told, in no uncertain terms, that we were being encouraged to create new characters and new everything. And in order to inspire us, DC had a participation program. They had a participation program in which we were told we would have a percentage of any ancillary use of these characters. So they did a comic book called, Captain Potato Salad, and we had created Captain Potato Salad. We would get money even if we didn't work on that comic. And if there were toys, if there were pajamas, if there were raincoats, if there were lunch boxes, decals and stickers and coloring books made of that character with that character in it, we would get a piece of the DC licensing. Well, I didn't need to be asked twice. I just went crazy creating new characters, which I probably would have done anyway. I didn't want to always, it's Batman. He's got a great rose gallery, but you don't want to go back to them over and over and over and over again. And I like creating these little ancillary characters who only appeared a few times. One of them was the actuary. And the actuary was a guy who worked for the insurance company figuring out actuary tables. Insurance companies are basically a huge casino. You bet you're going to get real sick, and they bet you're not. And then you put your money down, and and they're hoping they don't ever have to put their money down, or not for a long time, not till they've got a lot of your premiums. And the actuary figured out those odds, and this actuary decides he's going to freelance, and he comes up with an actuary table that he says will predict where Batman will be, so that crimes can be committed without interference from the Dark Knight. And he goes to work for the Penguin, and as you can see here, things really don't work out. But I like creating characters like this. And I heard recently from an insurance company executive, and he or she said that they've actually used this story in presentations to insurance companies of this Batman story about the actuary. But over the run of Detective and Robin and Nightwing and Birds of Prey, I created I've signed 250 participation agreements. And, and they stand to this day. They stand in perpetuity. Now, as far as characters I created, you mentioned in general, Hadrian Armstrong. I really dug him. I used him a few times in Detective, once in Legends of the Dark Knight, and a number of times in Robin. And he's a character, he's a boy genius, psychopathic military tactician who would commit crimes or atrocities based on his knowledge of historical military tactics. He was always fun. He's just a little jerk. The Baffler, he was Cluemaster's henchman, and he decides that he can do what the Cluemaster does, and he creates this persona of the Baffler. Kind of two parts removed the Riddler. Cluemaster was an imitation of the Riddler. The Baffler is an imitation of Cluemaster. But of course, the Baffler is a moron. And so his baffling puzzles are easy to solve. And he always ends up behind bars. But created him. Gearhead was another one. Graham Nolan and I created him. I think he became an action figure a couple of times. And if I'm not mistaken, he became a Superman villain in the cartoons. I'm not sure. Graham and I had, big plans for this guy, but he never really seemed to take off. That's the thing. You can create these characters, but will other creators use them? That's up to them. But whether your character has legs or not. And in Gearhead's case, obviously he doesn't have any legs at all. But in the end, it all pays off. You create these characters, and DC gives you a little piece of their licensing, and particularly in toys and things like that. a character like Bane, pays and pays and pays, or something like the Redbird, by naming Robin's car the Redbird, Tom Grummett and I get royalties whenever it's turned into a toy, even if it's a motorcycle. It doesn't even have to be a car. It doesn't even have to look like the one in the comic, as long as it's called the Redbird. And I noticed in recent years they just call it the Robin Mobile. I guess that's to get out of giving Tom and I any money, but or they've forgotten what it's called. But but that was the impetus. Like I said, I probably would have created a bunch of new villains and ancillary characters anyway, but the impetus for creating them. And in recent years, DC's become sort of expanded that idea by paying for story content. So I've gotten checks off of movies and TV shows I've never seen because they used elements or plot lines or whatever, dialogue, that I wrote in the comics, and they used it in a movie or television show. And this goes for DC only. At Marvel, you get jack squat for anything they decide to use. They might pay up a pittance. I mean, the little amount of money they've paid for characters that they literally made billions off of is sad and pathetic. But at least DC give you a little taste of the cash. Thomas Pellegrino. If you were given carte blanche from Marvel higher-ups to do a 2-year-long Punisher epic, what kind of stories would you do if broken down into 4 separate story arcs, and what current artists would you pick for each arc? Also, would you have an underlying story that connects all 4 arcs, or just have them all be their own individual stories? I'd probably be tempted to tell a 2-year-long story broken up into like 6-issue arcs. Each of those 6-issue arcs would be equivalent of like a feature film. So you'd have the original story and then 3 sequels. All Punisher stories, in my mind, all good ones, are deconstructed plot lines, which means that Frank Castle sets a goal or mission for himself, and then everything goes wrong. Problems arise, often caused by Frank himself. And he's got to shoot himself. He's got to shoot his way out of the problems he's surrounded himself with. And I would go with that, but I would probably write like a mega deconstructed story where the initial 6-issue adventure, I'm just spitballing here, blue sky, and the initial 6-issue event would be a standard Punisher stalking a guy and everything else. But this creates problems for Punisher, and so he has to go on the run. In sort of a violent shoot 'em up trip around the world as forces pursue him. He has to go into hiding, but of course Frank's never going to go into hiding. He's not going to conceal himself very long. He's going to run into some trouble. He's going to meet somebody he really doesn't like and want to take them down and draw attention to himself once again. And I would include, as a big part of the story, an element that I really wish I'd thought of when I was on Punisher, and I never did, but Garth Ennis did, much to his credit, come up with a recurring law enforcement figure who was hunting for Punisher. And I'd probably expand that to a global law enforcement agency looking for Frank Castle. And in addition, just because it's a Punisher story, and you can never have enough bloodletting, I probably also have a criminal or criminals at the same time hunting down Punisher. So it's kind of a collision story, race to see who's going to get to Frank first, and massive complications and everything going wrong. And that's what I would do. I think that's a good basis for a 2-year-long story arc. That's if I was given carte blanche and the page rate was okay. So, Twin Spin. Taking your first question second here, Thomas. Does Zaylan have any comparisons to Namor, where he is sometimes a brutal villain and then at other times he's a mere anti-hero? Did Namor or characters like Jim Starlin's Adam Warlock or Captain Marvel also inspire Zaylan? Zaylan's design, which is flawless, reminds me of a classic cosmic Marvel characters. Apologies if you've already answered this question before. Zaylan is an upcoming graphic novel from Rippaverse, and he is their first truly cosmic character in the mold of an Adam Warlock or not Namor, but he is in some ways inspired by Namor. That he's single-minded on a mission. It's all about what he wants to do. He is a bit. He's not a personality plus kind of guy. He's not a people person kind of guy, although he's highly relatable. But he is in a way a lot like Namor, but also in ways he's like Adam Warlock, where he has this like mysterious origin that he has to get to the bottom of. And he is quite powerful as a character, as is Adam Warlock, with the true nature of his powers yet to be fully delved into, fully explored. But Zaylan has many fathers. Another huge influence, of course, is Nexus. For me, the greatest cosmic character in comics ever. This is superhero space opera for grown-ups. Namor, big influence. Mike Barron's work on this is seminal, and a huge influence on so many creators who were coming up in the 80s, and one I look forward to rereading again and again and again. Green Lantern, another one, because Zaylan sometimes will cooperate with this intergalactic law enforcement agency when it suits his purposes. So I don't want to reveal much more about Zaylan, except it will be out soon, and I think you'll dig it. And Joe Bennett's art is just mind-bending. As the Saskas refer to Zaylan, it's trippy. And yes, it is very, very trippy. Kian Kurji. Have you ever read anything by James Ellroy? I'm about halfway through The Black Dahlia, and it's really good. I've also seen the movie LA Confidential, but haven't read the book yet. He also seems to have built this persona of being an insane person in his interviews. Yeah, James Ellroy is probably not a guy you want to go on a long car ride with. He's not the guy that you want to sit next to and coach on a plane. I don't know how much of that is like made up for entertainment purposes or is the real him, but he seems to be a bit of a prickly pear, which is cool. I like my authors who are prickly pears. I don't want my authors to be, I like iconoclastic individuals, loners, which Ellroy very much is. Yes, I was a big fan of Ellroy, and of course, LA Confidential. I read Black Dahlia, which came out just before LA Confidential, but I was a fan of his before. He did a series of Lloyd Hopkins books about an LA police detective, and they appeared in paperback, and I read all of them, so I was a big fan of his, even before he moved into doing these period set, LA cycle of stories. And I read Black Dahlia, I read LA Confidential, I read the follow-up, which I can't remember, and I read White Jazz. And then after that, he kind of lost me. I made it, I think, through about half of American Tabloid, and it became a little too frenzied for me. If you've never read Ellroy, he writes in almost a bebop style, very casual. So Hunter S. Thompson, William Burroughs kind of approach to writing crime fiction, and it's very, very effective. His use of language is amazing, but I think that it went from being like muscular powerhouse writing to kind of a gimmick in my mind. I just really could not get through American Tabloid. It was too much. But that said, all the early novels I really like. In fact, LA Confidential, I've gone back and I've reread the first chapter of that any number of times. I'm probably going to do it as soon as I'm done here. I'll pull that book off the shelf and just reread that first chapter, because it's just 101 on action, how to mix action and exposition and suspense all in just a few pages. Just a terrific piece of writing. So yeah, big fan. Big fan. Bruno Bookstore at gmail.com. Bruno Bookstore at gmail.com is the best way to reach me if you want to have a question, suggestion, whatever. It's the most reliable way to reach out to me. And that's it for this week, sadly. The show comes to an end. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Thanks for likes and subscribing and all the rest. And hopefully I'll see you all down the road.